Hello, welcome to IDZ Talks with Anastasia Larina. The United States is to engage in a renewed diplomatic push to calm the tensions in the Middle East, since there is a possibility of a big war starting in the region following the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Will the U.S. efforts help to calm down the tensions in the region, and how the results of the presidential elections in November 2024 affect the American course of global politics? All details in my program now. Joining me from the United States is Glen Howard, former president of the Jamestown Foundation. Warm welcome to IDZ Talks.
Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much. And my first question, what is the current U.S. role in the regional political picture in the Middle East?
The current U.S. role in the Middle East is it's trying to influence Israel to stop the ongoing military actions in Gaza. It's been 100 days since the October 7th and those tragic dates, that date and when the attacks occurred by Hamas on Israel. And so what we've seen is that Israel's been trying to achieve a military solution to this. But the problem is the time is now gone beyond 100 days, and the Biden administration is very much being influenced by its desire to bring about some type of quick solution to the ongoing war there in Gaza. And so the United States is pressuring the Netanyahu government right now to do something, but they're also trying to balance U.S. domestic politics, the situation in the Red Sea with the Houthis that is affecting international shipping in the Suez Canal. So there's these issues that are now expanding, and today there was Iranian airstrikes on Pakistan. So the situation in the Middle East or greater Middle East is now kind of expanding and intensifying. And we see the U.S. envoy to Lebanon, Amos Hochstein, has now asked Israel to pull back, or not Israel, but asked Lebanon to pull back from the Lebanese border to force Hezbollah to move back 7 kilometers from the border. So there's still some intensification, intense relations going on between Lebanon, the United States, Israel, and Hezbollah. So we don't just have one conflict, but we have a series of simmering issues and a hot conflict going on in Gaza right now. And so the Biden administration is trying to balance all that.
Mr. Howard, do you agree with the statement that the end of the conflict between Israel and Gaza will also help to reduce the tensions in the Middle East?
Well, yes, it certainly will. And I think, too, you asked a question about U.S. domestic politics. Well, there's also an issue in Israel of Israel's domestic politics. And Netanyahu has a cabinet filled with people that we would call the far right in Israel. And so there's differences of views on Israel's ability to continue the war in Gaza, even among Netanyahu's advisors. And so that is affecting Israel's own approach to the war. And the United States has shown a lot of strategic patience with Israel. But it's really reaching kind of a crisis point now, I think. There are media reports that the Biden administration is now getting tired of the war. It's dragging on far too long, and that their patience with the Netanyahu government is now starting to come to an end. So this is now affecting bilateral relations between Israel and the United States. And of course, in Israel, it matters to have the United States. Its attitudes and approaches to the war are very, very important because of the strategic role played by the United States in a region of countries that are not exactly all too friendly with Israel. So the United States matters to Israel as an ally. So when the patience of the United States and the Biden administration gets very thin, it's very hard for them. It becomes even harder on Israel. And Netanyahu has been trying to balance his own cabinet with the war, his situation, Gaza, and now you got the United States. So, and for good measure, you can throw in the attacks by the Houthis. So you're also seeing, the attacks by Iran and Pakistan are now showing that Iran is becoming very much of a wild card and unpredictable in how it's acting. in the Middle East. And so that's unpredictability factor is very, very important because there's a lot of internal turmoil inside of Iran over the succession of Khamenei. So so we have what we say in America is a full plate.
Mr. Howard, let's try to understand, is it possible for the US to return to the Middle East, mostly militarily?
You know, we'll certainly see an increased military presence in the Red Sea. But the United States isn't able to put aircraft carriers into the Red Sea because of the threat. So you're now seeing increased naval activity by the United States using special forces against the Houthis. And there's calls in the United States by some to put U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen. And that is very controversial given the past of what the U.S. situation in Afghanistan and putting troops in Iraq. I mean, that's a very controversial issue inside the United States and domestically that people are opposed to that. And that obviously President Trump has called for an end to what they call forever wars in the Middle East. So it's going to be a delicate balance too for Biden and how he tries to deal with this situation. But there is an increased American military presence in the Navy in the Red Sea, and that's complicating factors because I don't think the United States can militarily defeat the Houthis in Yemen. I think it's a fool's errand to try to do that because nobody has been able to solve the problem in Yemen.
You already started to speak about the presidential elections campaign in the United States. At the moment, United States is actually involved in two hot wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. Does it mean that the events in these two hotspots will definitely affect the candidates' election campaign in the United States?
Well, yes, I mean, and obviously Biden's approach to Israel has won him very high marks from the American Jewish community, have applauded his approach to Israel on this war. So he gets high marks in there. And so I don't see domestically inside the United States much difference between Trump's approach or Biden's approach. But the Middle East will certainly be very high on the minds of many people in the United States. But then again, in the United States, the domestic economic situation is getting quite bad with inflation. And so American minds are not as focused on, in other words, it's not like after 9/11 when the United States supported intervening in Afghanistan to go after bin Laden. Now the situation is much different, having much reduced our presence in the Middle East. The American approach to the region is much different than it was, say, 20 years ago or after the period after 9/11. So that is also affecting the U.S. approach and may affect Biden, and going forward on how, if he puts too much pressure on Netanyahu, it could affect him in the upcoming presidential election. But I really think that foreign affairs is not going to be real high on the minds of many Americans when they vote in November for either Biden or Trump. They will be looking at the domestic economic situation, I think, in my opinion.
The United States presidential elections are being watched all around the globe. So how might the election results affect the United States global agenda and global politics? I mean, after the November 2024, what should we expect? Definitely it will depend on who will take the position of the president of the United States in November 2024.
Well, I don't think if Biden is reelected, I don't think it'll change much, but you do see more American involvement in the Middle East under Biden, who has reversed the trend created by Trump. And one example of that is the American presence in Syria, which continues to irritate Turkey. You've had the recent killings in Iraq of another 9 Turkish soldiers at the hands of the PKK, and many in Turkey that think that the United States is backing think that the United States continues to support the PKK through the ongoing U.S. military presence in Syria. And so the growing military capabilities of the PKK against Turkey is something that's really much infuriating many in Ankara. And you can certainly make the argument that the United States is actually expanding its war and presence in the Middle East, which is contrary to what happened under Trump. So this is another kind of geopolitical shift, I think, in the Middle East by the Biden administration. And I would say that it's headed by a guy named Brett McGurk, who has been a very big champion of the Kurdish issue and has been a very serious irritating factor to Turkey and its approaches to the Middle East, because McGurk gets a lot of support from the Armenian community, from the Kurdish community. And so this is a kind of an irritating factor. Now, on the other hand, there's a guy named Amos Hochstein, who's, I think, is very friendly to Azerbaijan because of his role in energy diplomacy. And so Hochstein is emerging as a big factor in U.S. Shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East, because he's been given the role of dealing with Lebanon. And he was quite successful in Lebanon in resolving some of the issues in Lebanon with the oil agreement on the offshore oil zone in Lebanon. So this Hochstein was a big role in that. Now he's involved in the situation with the negotiating and resolving and trying to reduce the tension between Israel and Lebanon over Hezbollah and Israel's threats to attack them. So Hochstein is somebody that would be very, if he continues his rise in the Biden administration, could be very beneficial to Azerbaijan, and because of his role. And so there's reports that there's Amos Hochstein versus McGurk are two key figures that are kind of trying to position themselves for influence with Biden. And so that's a very interesting domestic development inside the U.S. when it comes to the Middle East that potentially could affect Azerbaijan. But I right now, I'm just going to limit my comments to the Middle East. So,
Well, you said about Armenian Lobby. What influence can the Armenian Lobby play in this time? I mean, in this process?
I would say that Blinken's decision on January 4th to put Azerbaijan on the religious watch list by the State Department is another troubling sign that the Biden administration is positioning itself to win favor with the Armenians in the U.S. Elections that are coming up. And I had thought that the U.S. under Blinken would be more cautious in dealing with Azerbaijan, but they're not. And when it comes to the religious watch list, now that's a I think that, so to answer your question is, I think that, the favoritism shown to the Armenian diaspora in the United States is continuing by the Biden administration under Blinken. And these are two recent signs. But the progress that is being shown, and there's going to be the meeting between the Armenians and Azerbaijan on the border talks on delimiting the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the end of the month. And as long as there continues to be good progress being made between Azerbaijan and Armenia to resolve the conflict between themselves, I think it's going to be hard for the Biden administration to do much more critical of Azerbaijan and its policies. And so I will admit that putting Azerbaijan on the religious watch list was a shock to me. I kind of thought that they were being more cautious in their approach. Especially after O'Brien's visit to Azerbaijan. I thought that Azerbaijan handled the situation quite well and admirably, and decided not to let this issue become a sore point in relations. They tried to make a point to move on and keep focusing on the bigger goal, which is resolving the conflict, having good relations with the United States. So I think Azerbaijan has shown great patience when it comes to deal with these irritating issues in relations with the United States. But I wouldn't, there may be some other issues, that are coming up in U.S. criticism of Azerbaijan that are being influenced by the domestic lobby inside the United States. But again, good news coming out of Yerevan, between Baku and Yerevan, affects the situation. So let's keep hoping that positive trend continues.
Well, Mr. Howard, you have worked for the late Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski from 2002 until 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And you have a great experience of working in the political system. So I would like now you to analyze the United States domestic policy, mostly referring to the global priorities. Let's say, if you have a chance to give an advice to the policymakers in Washington, which destinations should be among the top priorities for the United States in the upcoming months and maybe years, please?
I would say the Organization of Turkic States. I am really optimistic about this group. I think that President Aliyev pointed out when we met with him in December the 4th, that there's a lot of promise to this organization. And I think Americans underestimate and are not as focused as they should be on this part of Central Asia or Greater Central Asia and Eurasia. They're not as focused on it as they should be. I think the Organization of Turkic States could emerge as a counter block to the European Union. I think the United States should try to maybe even establish an observer status with the Organization of Turkic States, because the trends of unification, joint declarations, the meeting with Biden in New York of what they call the C5+1 was a very positive trend. You have the President of the United States sitting down with the leaders of the Central Asian states, and it shows that Central Asia is becoming more strategically important. President Aliyev has mentioned how important it is in his numerous visits to Uzbekistan and to the region. And he's showing great vision, I think, for the region by saying that Azerbaijan has a role in this area to play. And I would say so does Pakistan. And so I think that this area has a lot of potential, not to be a bloc aimed against say Russia or China, but just to be emerge as a unified economic bloc that has potential, because it will get the recognition of the West and get the recognition of Europe. And I think it could become a great trade body for the United States to deal with as the U.S. tries to deal with the European Union. So it requires some vision and looking forward to the region and understanding its strategic importance. And I would say that the Central Asian states are now pushing for idea of a strategic minerals summit on key strategic minerals like lithium and uranium and things like that. And I think that is a very positive idea and trend as well, because China needs strategic minerals. Eurasia and Central Asia have strategic minerals. The role of energy and gas are all very critical in this, as the region is part of what we know as the middle corridor. So that, to answer your question, I think that's the area we need to look at.
Well, Mr. Howard, thank you. Thank you so much for joining IZ Talks today. It was a real pleasure to know more about your experience about the global politics of the United States and the domestic situation in the United States. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for having me.